Alrighty guys, so here we are in the Arboretum. For question 1, we will be completing that kind of throughout the video, so just kind of keep that in mind. We're going through, I'll point out the different species. Question 2 is going to be coming up here on the left hand side in a second. I'm just going to be paying attention to the fruiting species, this crabapple here, for example. You can kind of see some of the buds that are starting to pop out, but you should generally know the differences between deciduous and evergreen trees. For example, evergreens will have needles and deciduous trees will have broadleaves. And we're coming up to questions 3 and 4 here. Here are some pruned limbs, so you can start to answer question 3. If you pay attention to the bark, this bark is actually pretty distinct. And here's another deciduous tree pruning example on this crabapple. They are part of the same family and genus as the cherry tree that we were just looking at. These next few trees are kind of fast forwarded through because they're not pertinent to your assignment, but I figured if you guys are stuck at home, you might want to see some of the trees that you would have encountered going along this Arboretum walk. It's kind of quick, but I figured some of you might appreciate it. Before we get to our first pine tree, where we'll be kind of going through some of the characteristics that you'll be looking at for your table completion. Alrighty guys, and we are coming up on our first pine tree that we'll be using for our pine table. That's on page 2 of your lab manual. So this is our Japanese white pine. This is just kind of walking to the next part where we're going to be looking at the dawn redwoods. Just kind of fast forwarded through this part so you guys can just still see what it would have looked like had you actually gone to the Arboretum. But my feet sound like Stewie feet from Family Guy, so I apologize, but still, it's there. Alright, so we're coming up to our dawn redwoods. So this one can be a little tricky. So the difference between evergreen and deciduous is evergreen is the needles stay on the tree year round, and deciduous they fall off. So note that the dawn redwood does have needles, like all conifers, but they are not there. So hopefully you can put 2 and 2 together and understand
Also,
that this is
a
little note here that you guys can absolutely
certain
pause
type
the video
of
wherever you need
very
to
exclusive
to jot
conifers.
down information in your chart or for answering any of the questions along the way.
All right, and we're
So I
going
know
to fast
sometimes the video
forward
can go a little
through
bit
the
quickly
walking
through
down the
some
path
of the
again.
questions that
And so
might
we're
take a little
going
bit
to be
more time to
looking
answer.
for a grove of eastern white pines.
But just remember that you have already answered question 7 as well. There's 2 parts in question 7 as well, so make sure you answer both of those. So that's the bench that we were looking for. And here is our eastern white pine. I'll kind of go through the needles again. So you can see that there's 5 needles there. Well, it's kind of difficult to see exactly, so I'll kind of give that one to you guys. And there's the bark, what it looks like. So again, this is one of our trees that we'll be noting in our table on the front page. And our cones. They're a bit bigger than the last tree, you remember. So this is our dwarf eastern white pine species, which is much smaller than our regular eastern white pine. I'll show you the needles here. Eventually there we go. So for those of you that can't really tell very well, that's also 5 needles. There we go, that's a good job. All right, we're leaving our dwarf eastern white pine. We're gonna walk over to our weeping eastern white pine, which is very visibly different. There you go. And I'm gonna show you the needles here in just a second. There you go. There are our needles. So that should be it for question 10. So this is just kind of a shot of all the different varieties of our eastern white pines that we have here in the Arboretum. There are several different subspecies. All right, so this part is going through the eastern U.S. forest section of the Arboretum. Go through it relatively quickly because there's quite a bit of ground to cover, but hopefully you should see a pretty easy to identify pattern of these trees, right? So pretty much all these are missing their leaves, so that makes them a certain type of tree, like, you know, evergreen versus deciduous. And it kind of just goes through it quickly, but remember you can always pause the video to be able to answer your questions. This particular part of the video is just for question 11. There's a red maple starting to bud out a little bit. All right, and we're coming up to our jack pines. So this is going to be question 12 and 13 and 14. So that's your lovely identification marker. Make note of that really thick bark. And again, this is going to be part of your pine table on the second page of the lab you need to complete. So I'll be showing you the needles and the cones here in just a second as well. So we're walking into the display garden now. Kind of walk by most of the plants in this section just so you can kind of get a general idea of what this area looks like. And in just a little bit, I'll zoom in on some plant identification markers so that you can answer question 16 for that hint. All right, so here's our ephedra. So this is going to be question 17. So hopefully you can get a good look at this plant. Again, you can always pause the video. It's going to be question 17 and 18. So it's right next to our Rocky Mountain juniper tree. So this is our lovely rubber rabbit brush. So this is one of the plants that we're looking at for question 19. coming up on our snowbrush shrub. And it has pretty large, dark green, shiny leaves, but of course it's winter time, so everything kind of looks a little bit different than what the descriptions say in our lab manual, but this is our lovely snowbrush shrub. Alrighty, so we are continuing down our path. We're about to come up on our quaking aspen here on the left-hand side. So that's our lovely little stand that we have here in the Arboretum. A little bit further down the path, we'll see our bitterbrush, but here are some of our sagebrush bushes here that are actually marked, so I'm just going to want to point these out before we get down to the bitterbrush, where there are still some more sagebrush. Alright, now kind of skipping down the path a little bit. Here's our bitterbrush. So again, looks a little bit different because it's winter time, but you can still see their leaves, stems, shape, color, things like that for question 19. And also for question 20, you're going to be looking at this one and that sagebrush that we were just looking at as well. Here's some more sagebrush. So we are looking at the differences between the sagebrush and bitterbrush for question 20. So here's just a little bit more video for you guys to get a good answer for that. So we're just kind of continuing down our path to get down to our ponderosa pines, our lovely agriculture field on the left-hand side. And here are our ponderosa pines in the Arboretum. So clearly you can't answer question 22, but question 21 goes back to our table. So I'll be running through our needles and cones and what the bark looks like, all that jazz. Here are our needles. It's a little bit quick, but here's just for size reference on how much longer those are in comparison to the other needles we've kind of been seeing today. Here's a better shot of those needles, so you can easily count those. And here is our ponderosa pine cones. So they're not quite as big as our eastern white pines, and we'll kind of see a big difference in the next two pines as well. Alright, we're kind of up on our Colorado blue spruce. This is a spruce, so it's clearly not going in our pine table, but I just kind of wanted to have you guys see what these stark comparisons are between our Colorado blue spruce and our pines that we've been looking at today. So it has that really silvery blue color to it. And our spruce cones are very different from our pine cones. They're conifers, so they're cone-producing trees. Alright, so we're walking up to our bristlecone pine. So in our pine table, this is listed as Pinus longeva, because it's our longest lived species of tree. Here it's listed as Pinus aristata, so it's the Rocky Mountain bristlecone pine, specifically for this tree, but regardless, it's the same one that you can use for your table. So the needles are very different looking in comparison to the previous pines that we've looked at. So here are our needles for our bristlecone pine. So normally they're pretty close together, but I just kind of fan them out well enough so you can actually count them. Again, you can always pause the video where it's kind of fanned out a little bit better. So you can take a second to count those correctly. Walk around the tree so you guys can see the bark here in just a second. Here's a good shot of that. And for the cones, I couldn't find any, so you can go ahead and just jot down no cone for the cone length box for this tree. Okay, so this is going to be our lodgepole pine. So there wasn't any identification card, but this is our lodgepole, so it's Pinus contorta. And I'll be showing you guys the needle length and cone length in just a second. Alright guys, you made it. You got to your last pine species for our pine table. Here's a good shot of our western white pine bark. And I'll be showing you guys the needles and the cones here in just a second. So here's a needle bunch. It's actually missing a needle in this one, so it's supposed to be a 5 needle per bundle pine species, which is the same as our eastern white pine, if you guys remember that from earlier. Alright, and we're coming up on our last few questions here. So we're looking at some of the pruned branches off of this western white pine. So you see a pretty big characteristic of sap and everything kind of oozing out of these wounds for the tree. And after that, you guys should be good to go.